So I am AJ Wheeler. I'm a volunteer for Teton County Search and Rescue and local emergency doctor. And have had the privilege for quite a while working with the University of Utah Wilderness Medicine Fellowships. So we've got a big group in here, lots of backgrounds. For those of you that don't understand the way medical education goes, you're in medical school and you graduate, you become a doctor, and then you go to residency to decide what you're going to specialize in. Typically, people that specialize into emergency medicine can then do extra training into a year in multiple different areas, but one of them is wilderness medicine. I think over the years we've had a surgeon, we've had some APPs and a few other backgrounds, but predominantly emergency physicians have come through that way. Family physicians have done that. So when we have the fellows up here, we have medicine background, and then at this point, most of a year of training in wilderness medicine specifically. So Dr. Scott McIntosh will be presenting today. He is the head of the Wilderness Medicine Fellowship, along with Dr. Inbach, who is the fellow this year. And the way it works is that she has to do all the work, and Dr. McIntosh gets to just kind of smile and most of it probably. So we will welcome them up here in a moment, but first, given that this is Guides Night, we're hoping to provide some programming in this risk management series that was a little bit more geared towards the professional groups around us. Hopefully it's a little bit more in-depth than you have seen elsewhere, and given the backgrounds that we have here, I'm sure we'll be a little up and down for different groups over the night, but we're hoping to provide something for everybody. At the end of the day, Maddie's going to send out a survey asking what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you want to see in the future. And we're hoping to make this something that we continue to do on a yearly basis. So please answer that. That way we can provide something that's better next year. But we're going to kick the night off tonight with our chief pilot, Steve Wilson, giving us just a little information on the helicopter, how we can interface from a guide standpoint or backcountry rescue standpoint with the helicopter safely. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Great. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm kind of here tonight just to give you an idea of our capabilities, answer any questions that you guys might have if you encounter us on a rescue. Our helicopter, we have several different tools that we can use in an avalanche rescue. One of them being, we have a beacon that we can hang out of the ship. It's about 5 pounds, about that big. Throw it in the back seat. We can deploy that very quickly. We just pull up on scene, slide it out the door, and we can start doing a transceiver search. We also have the heli reco detector, which we can also utilize. And we have some techniques that we can use in case there's hang fire and nobody wants to really get on the slope because they're worried about other stuff coming down on top of them. And so, you know what, if we're to get called to an avalanche, we're going to show up. If we do determine there is hang fire, then we're going to deploy the AVI beacon. If we can't get a hit with that and it is a known burial, then we can deploy our reco as well. And anybody who's wearing, you know, any clothing, you know, a lot of the companies nowadays have the reco reflectors. So it's nice having both tools because we can, if somebody forgot to turn their beacon on, if you know, the beacon malfunctioned for any reason, we can kick that reco out and start a search with that. Typically with ski clothing, we can find somebody fairly quickly. So also, if we do get a hit, we can throw out a ribbon and then we can go into our short haul operations if there's hang fire, keep our guys on the line, put them on the slope. They can do their fine grid search, dig the patient up, and then just staying on the line. If something breaks free above them, then we can pick them up quickly. So we have some cables on the end of those lines that will allow them to dig without hitting the rope with their shovel. So a lot of different techniques we can use. For you guys, who carries a BCA radio screw or some equivalent to it? If you guys are on scene and you have a BCA radio, we have a frequency that, you know, channel 3 privacy code 7, so 307, like our area code. So if you guys switch that frequency, we actually have a new antenna on this aircraft that will allow us to get in that UHF frequency range that we can talk to you guys direct, which is the best way to make contact with you guys and kind of give you instructions and let you know what we're up to. So remember that 307, that's we'll have that plugged into the ship. We also have 911, but 307 is gonna work. We're gonna try that first. So if we pull up on scene, you guys are on scene, you witness an avalanche or you're involved in an avalanche, the best thing you can do is, obviously, if it's your partner that gets caught, you're not gonna call 911 right away. You're gonna be digging out your buddy. But the sooner the better that you can call us. If you witness an avalanche and you think, hey, maybe somebody's caught in that, give us a call. The quicker heads up that we can get all our folks on scene and ready. If you determine that, or somebody determines that, hey, somebody's not caught in this thing, we just turn around and go home. So the best thing to do is get us here at the hangar ready to launch. So if you guys determine, hey, somebody's been caught, somebody's buried, they're still buried, whatever it may be, or injured, we can be moving. Response times are typically, if we have our folks here after a training, we could be 15 to 30 minutes. If not, it could be up to 45 minutes to an hour before we get there. But the sooner you guys call us, the quicker we're going to get there. Otherwise, if we pull up on scene, you guys are on scene, the best thing that you guys can do is kind of stay away from the helicopter. Secure all your gear. We're not going to land right on top of you guys, especially if we're not in contact with you. So secure all your gear, secure everybody. We're going to put our folks down. Our folks are going to jump out, and then we're going to fly away. Our folks will come up to you and, assess the situation, assess the patient, get them to a place where I can land. And then I'm going to land right on top of them. They're going to load the patient. We're going to get out of there. But one thing we don't do in the winter is we don't move in and out of the rotor system. So never approach a helicopter if we show up on scene, even if it's close to you guys. Always keep that gear secure. If you are assisting us in loading a patient, then you're going to stay under the rotors until we fly away. So it's going to be fully like heli ski style. If we decide that we're going to utilize you guys, like we're going to come and land to you, you're going to stay put. I'm going to bring the helicopter up to you, and I'm going to put the nose of the helicopter right up on top of you, and you're going to be a statue. Last thing we want is you moving around, especially towards the tail or out towards the periphery of the rotor system. When we pack the helicopter's skids into the snow, the bear paws on the back keep the tail out of the snow. So what that does is the toes of the skids continue to sink, and that brings the rotor system to about this level. So last thing you guys want to be doing is moving in and out of the rotor system. If we show up on scene, and it's very easy to find an avalanche, but sometimes it's tough to find a patient or you guys. So, if you don't have a VCA radio, we can't make contact with you. A headlamp on strobe mode helps us find you. Anything you guys can do, if you have chalk, I don't know if any of you carry it, but if you can throw some chalk on the snow, that helps us find you. But carrying a headlamp, I'm sure everybody does it in here. Just put it on strobe, point at the helicopter, and we'll be able to find you quicker. Any questions?
No. So even during the daytime, you feel like you can see those strobes pretty good usually.
Yeah, the small Phoenix lights that we use are strobes. They work great in the daylight, the bright sun. That helps. But sometimes a headlamp can be spotted. I mean, a lot of the stronger ones these days can be spotted on strobe mode. So. And then I guess another question was, how can you guys help in a rescue if we're showing up on scene? The best thing you guys can do, besides calling us in if we do have radio contact or helping us spot you, is secure all the folks that are on the scene. Keep them in one place. Make sure they don't approach the helicopter. Get all their gear secure, and then let us approach you. Just for that same reason, we don't want somebody to walk into a rotor or anything that you guys have on scene to fly into one of our rotors. That's the best thing that you can do at the time. It's just make sure the scene is secure. Cool.
Anybody got specific helicopter questions for Steve?
Awesome. Thanks, dude.
Yeah. Thank you.
So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to, Dr. McIntosh and Dr. Ingram.
Cool. All right. So AJ said that Molly did most of the work, and a lot of times she does, but this, I was so jazzed at researching this and putting this presentation together that it was kind of like, I didn't leave Molly a whole lot. So, but anyways, this is one of my passions, one of the things that I really get a kick out of. I'm an emergency doctor, and I also am a snowbird ski patroller and have a lot of different roles in and out of the mountain medicine world. But this has been really neat to put together because there's a lot of great people and a lot of good perspectives that we're going to have in this room. And this is controversies. This is not me telling you what I think. This is like us getting a lot of experts in the room and figuring out some things, or maybe even some, like we'll have some little punching matches in the corner about some debates and things. And then we'll kind of come out of this a little bit wiser. So and I think that there's a lot that we put together. It might be more than the allotted time. So what I wanted to do was get some feedback from you all to see if there's any certain topics that you want to make sure that we cover before we really get into this. And Molly and I got a couple of questions that you all put in just a couple hours ago. So we're going to try to hit on those, but we couldn't do our presentation all over again, start over again. So is there anything here that anyone's really jazzed to start out with? And I know that we have a lot of different types of people. We have some mountain guides, right? We have some search and rescue folks. We have some sheriff's office folks, and probably people who just want to have fun in the backcountry, right? So is there anything on this list that people want to start with? Like a couple things we want to start with? Or should we just go from the top?
Triage and resuscitation pathways.
Okay, triage. Why don't we do that? Triage and resuscitation pathways. So, and the way that, so the way that this kind of got on my radar when AJ said, "Hey, what do you think we should talk about in a month or so," was that a friend of mine and an avalanche colleague of mine from Switzerland told me that I was wrong on a paper that I had published. And it wasn't on triage, it was on probing and probing techniques. So we can go back on that. But that's what kind of got me jazzed about some of the things that are interesting and controversial in avalanche rescue and avalanche resuscitation. So let's keep going.
Or do you want to go all the way to Abbey Life?
Let's go to let's go here. Okay, so we'll talk about medical triage and medical resuscitation. I kind of did this in order from preventing an avalanche to at the end resuscitating someone, but we're just kind of go in reverse order, backwards. All right. So one of the pathways that has been published by the International Commission for Alpine Rescue, which is up on the board here, which I know a number of you all have gone to the International Commission for Alpine Rescue, is this one right here. I know that this looks a little bit scary, but we're going to break it down, and I think it's going to be a little bit less kind of in your face. So one of, basically all of the two avalanche pathways we're going to talk about today are going to be the ICAR one and the Avalife pathway. All right. And one of the things that and they have some similarities, but they diverge in a couple different areas. One of the things is that for ALS, the ICAR pathway says to measure esophageal temperature. All right. So how do we do that? What are some ways that you can measure esophageal temperatures? What's that?
You can buy
Thermometer, yeah.
low temperature thermometer off Amazon.
Okay.
With a type K probe. And then you can get an NG tube and cut that, stuff that down in there, and it kind of works.
Yeah, it kind of works. All right, and we have some EMS personnel. How do you all measure, how does one measure, measure temperatures with Zoll?
We don't do esophageal, so we
Right.
bring them to the ER and AJ or Keith.
Okay, but you have a probe that connects to the Zoll that just measures temperature. You can shove that in any place that you want in the human body, and it'll measure the temperature. So we've actually, in some of the slides beforehand, we've measured esophageal temperatures in people who are awake for some of these studies that we've done. We don't do that a whole lot, but they're under, you know, specific protocols, et cetera. But so why do we need to, why would we want to measure someone's temperature in an avalanche resuscitation? What's that?
See if they're alive or dead.
Okay, so, but you can be cold and dead, or, I mean, you can be cold and dead, or warm and dead, or warm and dead and cold and dead too. So Anthony. Okay, so that's one of the things we're gonna talk about. Candidate for ECMO. Do people know what ECMO is? Okay, ECMO stands for extracorporeal membranous oxygenation, basically taking blood out of the body, rewarming it, and putting it back into the body. And we'll go over a little bit about why that, you know, what that decision is. And so also is it over here measuring esophageal temperature. So if someone is cold and they don't have vital signs, so let's say that they, you all have, you all meaning you all here in the Tetons have had these cases. Let's say that you have a burial, you get to them 2 hours after the fact, you dig them up and they look dead. So there's a very rare circumstance that you can still be alive, right? You're nodding your head. How's that?
Sounds right.
Okay, so you can be hypothermic and be in a hypothermic cardiac arrest, but look 100% dead. You can look blue, you can have no vital signs, but that person can be alive and can be resuscitated. So that's why these resuscitation algorithms bring in a temperature. So if you have someone who you dig up after, and we actually had 2 fatalities over the Christmas holidays in Utah. Unfortunately, 2 people were skiing. This is not together, 2 separate incidences. One person was skiing solo and was found the next day. Another person was skiing solo and was dug up 6 hours later. All right. So by all means and what we know, those 2 people should be dead, right? Why dead of asphyxiation? Another thing here is that we're going to start, because these are controversies, we're going to start with the knowledge that you all have a decent amount of knowledge about avalanches. Okay, I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about traveling in avalanche terrain. Hopefully, have taken an avalanche 1, 2, or 3 course, and have a little bit of maybe even a CPR course or something. But that's my level of, that's where we're going to start from. Okay. So those people that you dig out so what's the normal asphyxiation time for someone who's buried underneath the snow? Let's just start off with that.
It's like after 15 minutes, your chance of survival drops dramatically.
Yeah, okay, so let's say 15 to 20 minutes, your chance of survival goes down very quickly. Normally after 20 or 30 minutes, the chance is very low. Unless there's a certain circumstance that you can live longer underneath the snow. And if you have a clear airway, like that your mouth isn't shoved full of snow or ice, and you have some sort of space in front of you, then you can live longer, meaning you can survive that first 30 minutes of asphyxiation and, you know, live for longer, maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, or even longer than that. There have been people have been dug out after many hours of being buried underneath the snow. They're still breathing, but they are getting colder and colder and colder and colder. All right. And what's the normal body temperature in Celsius? Someone's normal body temperature in Celsius? 98.6. Yeah, 30, so 37 in Celsius. I think about Celsius because it's easier. So 37 degrees is our body temperature. And we've done studies looking at the studies I talked about before, studies looking at cooling rates and how fast a body cools underneath the snow. So it's about 2 to 3 degrees centigrade per hour. All right, and some of your medical folks, you know, the temperature below which you start to have fatal arrhythmias like VTAC and VFib. It's a harder question. It's at about 30 degrees Celsius. Okay, so let's do some math. Let's say we're going to cool from 37 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius. Then you're going to start to get fatal arrhythmias. Then how many hours should that take? Couple, 3 to 4, whatever. All right, so someone would have to survive underneath the snow with an air pocket for 3 to 4 or whatever hours in order to get so hypothermic that they would start to have those fatal arrhythmias and be in hypothermic arrest. Okay, does that make sense? So 99, maybe 999 times out of 1,000, someone who's buried in an avalanche is going to asphyxiate within 30 minutes. But there's a small sliver of people who can survive that period of asphyxiation and go into a hypothermic cardiac arrest, but they are cold, but not dead yet. All right. So that's where this esophageal temperature comes into play. So let's say you dig someone up after 4 hours and they look dead, but let's say they have a space in front of their face and they don't have anything packed in their airway, then then there's just that small chance of them surviving. And the only way that you're going to tell is if they are cold, like if they are hypothermic, and that's where these pathways come into play. So this says under 30 degrees Celsius. All right. So someone is under 36 or 30 degrees Celsius, but looks dead, then that is that very small chance that that person could still be alive and maybe a candidate to be rewarmed with ECMO. All right. So the challenge is at closest ECMO is, does Zurich have ECMO?
Ermac has had the capability on and off. It's
Okay.
something we would have to call and check on.
Right.
So other than that, we're looking at Salt Lake City.
Yeah. Okay. So it's so hard to warm someone that is under 30 degrees Celsius that a lot of times it takes that ECMO, the ECMO capability to do so. And that's where a lot of these pathways come into play is at that place. If you have a burial that's long and they're cold, then and they don't have an obstructed airway, then that's that very, very small chance of that person being in hypothermic cardiac arrest. And then the question is, do you send them to Ermac? Do you send them to Salt Lake? Or do you do your best and try to warm them in a hospital, which you can warm them at other hospitals, but it's just harder and they don't have as good of a survival potential. All right. So I'm going to go over the HOPE score later on, but that's kind of a primer of the of some of the controversies in these pathways. All right. Number one is a lot of us don't have, or most of us or all of us don't have a temperature probe that we're going to be able to put down and find that out. And the second controversy is the ECLS capabilities is very difficult to manage. And I remember AJ called me a few years ago. There was a case over in Big Holes of the snowmobilers that was buried 6 hours or so. Was it?
They
And a
weren't,
long burial.
they weren't buried that long, but had no signs of life when they were dug up.
Yeah.
And we had the makeshift probe on scene, so we were able to measure some core temperatures or esophageal temperatures. But it was just I think it was a hard case for the team in general.
Right.
And making those decisions and a multi person burial.
Yeah.
The way I like to to think about the temperature, is if you're not under 30, everything's just normal. Normal CPR, normal, you do your normal things for a cardiac arrest. And if you're below 30, then you have to start making hard decisions.
Because that's when they're warm and dead, warm and likely dead.
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
Quick question for us, obviously, we're not carrying, esophageal, we've typically been instructed to do rectal thermometers for severe hypothermia.
Uh-huh.
Where does that fall into usefulness compared to the esophageal?
yeah, so esophageal is what we call the gold standard, like that's the place you want to measure core temperature at the core. And we've actually, I don't have a slide, we've done burial studies that monitor all of these temperatures. So core body temperature via two different methods. So it is esophageal probe, a little capsule that people swallow, and then it goes around in their intestines, which is good for core temperature, and a rectal probe. So rectal probe is okay if that's what you have, but the esophageal probe is by far the gold standard, and that's what that's what we do in the hospital, because that's what it's designed to measure. But if you have a rectal temperature probe, then definitely use it, and definitely go off of it, and you can make decisions based off of that. Okay, so yeah.
It's an ungloved hand on for consider like the candidates.
Yeah, we've talked about, AJ and I have talked about this, and we haven't come up with anything that is reliable. So, how cold is the person who, is taking off their glove to put on? How, we haven't found that has a whole lot of reliability. I mean, if you have, if you feel someone and they feel warm, like to your skin, I mean, then you have to go with what you have, all right? But I don't think that it's going to be reliable in that situation. That these pathways, what they use is if you have someone who is buried for a long amount of time, and they, let's see, and the temperature is unknown, or if you're using a method that is, not a core temperature, then you would, I mean, in this algorithm, if the burial is over 60 minutes, and let's see, the temperature is unknown, then you're going to calculate this HOPE score, and then consider sending them to ECO and ECMO center. But I know that's really difficult and challenging, because that's not super easy to do in rural areas.
One of the bigger drawbacks of the ICAR guidelines is that it's very European centric.
Yeah.
Where their helicopter response has much closer heli bases, so the response time tends to be shorter, and they tend to have critical care physicians or paramedics on there with the equipment to do this, which in the US, and especially in the Western US, we're much further spread out and don't have those resources.
All right, so let's go over triage and multiple burials. And in order to best explain this, let's go over a case that we had in the Utah mountains in 2021. All right, and this is very sad, but it's very educational for a lot of reasons. All right, so this is in an area called Wilson Glades. It's between Mill Creek and Big Cottonwood Canyon. And it was a pretty concerning, it was a considerable and high avalanche day. So most people were skiing low angle terrain. And there were two groups of skiers on this same run at this time, or this same area at the same time. Group A is what they called, had 4 people. So Chris, Sarah, Tom, and Lewis, 5 people, and Steve. So they went up to this area. They did a couple laps, and then they regrouped up here, and then they came down to here. Then another group came up from the bottom, and it was unsure exactly who, which group triggered the slide, but a number of people were caught and buried. So here's the area, here's the ski tracks from that first group that had done a handful of laps beforehand. Just out of curiosity, here's the slope angles. And so they were trying to stay below 30 degrees, but I mean, here's 25 degrees, here's 32, 30, 27. But as you can see, and as we know, anything over 30 degrees can slide, and that's what did. And there were some steeper areas and steeper terrain on this side. So just because you think you're skiing, quote, low angle terrain, even 32 and 35 degrees, like that's avalanche terrain for sure. So all these people were buried. So Stephen, he had waited for his group up at the top here while they did another run. Chris was able to hang on to a tree, was not caught in the avalanche. And he immediately went to search. And mind you, these two groups didn't know that they were on the same slope at the same time. So he came down and dug up Nate, who was found to be 4 to 6 feet deep. All right. And these are some of the other controversies that I didn't put in, like shoveling strategies. I did put one shoveling strategy, but there's a lot. I mean, we could talk a lot about shoveling strategies, but how long does it take to dig someone who's 4 to 6 feet? Long time, yeah. And there was one person, actually Steve and Chris were digging, so a long time. All right, so they dug Nate up. They expected to find their partners. Their partners were down here. Okay, so they found someone who was not part of their group, and like, who are you? I think that was his exact words. Who are you? He wasn't breathing, but they were able to clear his airway, and he was breathing very soon afterwards. Then they moved on to Ethan, who was buried 2 feet deep. All right, so 2 feet deep, like that's still a decent amount of time to uncover someone's airway or uncover the chest and airway. All right, so again, Ethan was not part of the group. Like, can you imagine that, like, the terror going through their minds at this point? They've undug two people that they didn't even know or recognize. All right. So then they moved on to Steph, then they moved on to Sarah, who was Chris's girlfriend, and dug her out of 2 feet deep. She unfortunately didn't survive. And then they moved on to Lewis, who was 4 to 6 feet deep, didn't survive. And I think you can tell the rest of the sort of situation here. All right. So I mean, they dug out a number of people, and there were survivors. But the point of this bringing this up is that the time to dig someone out of 4 to 6 foot burial is, that's 30 minutes right there. Okay, so one of the other algorithms, the other avalanche resuscitation pathways, puts that into account, and it says if there is a deep burial, so a burial, and we define deep as being deeper than 1.5 meters, which is about 5 feet, and you have someone else that is in your group that is buried, then like that's kind of a decision point to, is this someone who I want to take all the time on, or should I move to that person who may be a 2 foot burial instead? So I'm not gonna be able to make all those decisions for you. Again, these are controversies that we can talk about, but that's where this pathway starts. All right. So if 4 to 6 feet deep, if that's your only person, your only victim, then yeah, you put all your resources to that. But if there are other people that are buried, then that's a decision point. Or if you have someone who is buried at 2 meters deep, 6 feet or so, then that might be someone you say this is not the person that I'm gonna take that time on. So I'm gonna stop here. I know I've been talking a lot, but you all have a lot of experiences. Any thoughts in the Tetons or in your all's experiences as far as depth? This is depth triage, and then we can talk a little bit more about, we'll talk a little bit more about medical triage.
And I just think about the practical piece of you're probably skins off and you're probably gonna go downhill to your next 5 feet. Now I'm gonna take a risk that the next person
Yeah.
may be shallower and
Uh-huh.
now I'm skins off. And if they're not, or I don't find, and yeah,
Right.
it's just complicating factors.
Right.
Moving around that zone
Mhm. Yeah,
and how far is the next.
right.
I think in this particular scenario, I think that it's probably applies better to a higher resource team.
Mhm.
Where, you're gonna ski the slope. And the way our team would do it was, we'd have somebody skiing down the slope, lock onto a signal, they're gonna hit that signal. If they get another signal, they're calling out, we're sending us another searcher that direction. And you're gonna identify burial at 3 meters, burial at 2.
Yeah.
And now you gotta start making tough decisions, do I put one person digging there, one person digging there? Or do I shift over to this? And there's definitely the time variable, but I do think there's at least one paper showing that burial greater than 2 meters was an independent predictor of death too.
Mhm. Yeah.
So not just necessarily the time to unbury them, but
Yeah, Mike, is Mike, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we train and talk about this a lot,
Mhm.
and you divide your resources and save none of them.
Mhm.
Is it possible, that's
Yeah.
kind of what you just alluded to, but, there's so many other variables. What is the hardness of the debris?
Mhm.
Because, I mean, you can throw it away sometimes and other times it takes a pickaxe, right?
Mhm.
And, I feel like no matter how much we train and talk about this, it's if you have a lot of resources, you have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
And you split them, but if you don't, it's if they're close by, it'd be great, like you actually are in some fantasy land where you know how deep the second
Yeah.
person's gonna be.
Yeah.
But you don't. They're further down the hill, you're gonna leave a fish to find a fish,
Mhm.
or leave your friend to maybe save another one that might be deeper.
Right.
It's very difficult decisions, and it's really hard to put them into these.
Yeah, oh yeah,
these
for
things.
sure. Yeah.
With these analysis that they've done, do you know, or have there been any studies or, information that's now factored in the newer technology that should give biofeedback? Getting biofeedback, are they saying 2 meters still tends to move on, or?
Yeah.
Dynamic, or?
I'm not aware of that, of actual studies, and these studies come out of Europe, which, I mean, they, like, these, like, this is all evidence-based, and they've done trials to see how fast you can dig up. We can dig someone up, and hard debris here or soft debris is actually, they allow up to 2 meters for your, but yeah, I mean, that 2 meters is, what is hard and what is soft. This is one of my missions in my career, is to have more of this research being done here. And, we'll talk a little bit about some of our research that we've done with some of the other controversies. But that's one of the things that I want to do here in our next generation is to start doing these projects here in the US, here in Utah, here in the Tetons. So I don't know of any research, and that most, a lot of that would be through ISSW. But yeah, these are things that if you have ideas, then let's, talk to your folks, and let's do some of these projects. Yeah.
I just was thinking, like, are there any papers or is there any research on, does depth of burial have anything to do with asphyxiation, like likelihood? Because the asphyxiation is the more immediate issue.
Mhm.
So if you had like a guideline for like, oh, they're probably, I don't think this actually exists, but it'd be interesting to find out if, they're not crushed so much, they can still breathe if they're only under 2 feet rather than if they're at 6 feet. It's
Yeah.
like, But you don't know that, because it's not like the sediment doesn't settle uniformly and.
Right. So I've had these discussions and I've had these discussions, and if there's any snow scientists in the room, then they can tell us what it is, but that the real deal. But most of the burials will form like the structure provides a lot of horizontal lattice work, so that once something is buried in avalanche debris, usually it's not going to push down anymore on that person, unless you have really soft snow. But like in avalanche debris that's like 30% density, it's not going to be pushing down on you. And when we get to another controversy, I'll show you some data about this, or some observational things about this. Yeah.
Do you have any like of the lead-in factors in these things? Like granted, the party didn't know the party of 3 is below. But is there more chance of a party of 5 to put 4 people on a slope at once? You have a party of 5 that only has 1 person left to get up 4.
Yeah.
Or would the party of 3 like be more apt to have 1 person on a slope? So like a group dynamic of how many people are in the backcountry at once anyway to create the situation like.
Right.
I mean, it's great stuff to discuss.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
we maybe eliminate that if we didn't have 5 people? Might put 3 on the slope at once, thinking they're spaced out better?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't look like very good spacing.
Right. Yeah, you think you have a group of 4, which is, I think is reasonable to go out in the backcountry, but all of a sudden you have a group of, maybe was that 8? That you didn't
But
know.
even
you
the
didn't
group of
know
5
existed.
doesn't look like they didn't have 4 people on the slope at
Mhm.
once.
Yeah.
So,
I don't, yeah, I've
I
read the
just wonder if
report, I
they
don't,
put
yeah,
those statistics on top of.
yeah, for sure. And the goal is to have 1 person exposed at a time, and so that you don't even have to use this triage method. But again, a lot of you all are search and rescue professionals, and that's not what that's what you sign up for, is going in after the fact. Or if you're a backcountry party and you see an avalanche across the way, then that's not what you signed up for, but that's what you're responding to. Yeah.
I would just say, anecdotally, it seems obviously since COVID and stuff too, that the backcountry's gotten more popular and more crowded.
Mhm.
So I don't know if stuff like this is more common. I don't know. I don't know the specifics of like the Rock Springs avalanche, but if that was multiple parties. But I feel like that could be something going forward that,
I mean, the outdoor recreation sector in general is getting bigger, but I think the cure's gotten better. It's cool. It's in all the social media. People are doing it. There's people that are doing it right. There's people that kind of know what they're doing, and there's people that show up to a place like this and grab a pair of skis and hike glory and have no idea what they're doing. So it's the whole gamut is out there. But I do think that there's more and more people in the backcountry doing different recreation things.
Yeah, and this is 2021, so right around COVID, and a lot of people are out in the mountains.
You guys have hit a topic which is like near and dear to all the physicians, because we love to pick this stuff apart. But I'm gonna suggest, just for time's sake, maybe we jump onto a different controversy.
Different controversy. Okay, I'm gonna just run through the rest of this, and then we'll do, so Avalife, I can email this to Maddie if you all want to have a copy of it. It's a free PDF. And what this one does that I really like is that it divides the resuscitation into the 3 things that are killing people, right? One is asphyxiation, likely within the first 20, probably 30 minutes, at max. Then it also divides the pathway into the blue hypothermia, right? That hypothermic arrest that could be going on, and then trauma. So there's about 25% of people who die in avalanches die of trauma, and so that's how we divided Avalife into. So ABCs, right? So we've kind of gone to the CABs, but in CPR, but for avalanche and drowning, we still want to do ABCs, right? Because that's what they need, is they need oxygen, they need air, the airway to be cleared, we need oxygenation. So 5 rescue breaths is what should happen right when you dig someone out. Or after clearing the airway, 5 rescue breaths. That comes from our drowning research. And then if you have 2 people, and this goes back to our triage, triage controversy. If you have more than one person that has been dug out and they have no vital signs, then start CPR. If you're resource limited, then what we found is by this research is that if you do 6 minutes of CPR and they don't have any vital signs at the end of that 6 minutes, then you go on to that next person who also needs CPR. If you have a resource limited, if it's just me and Molly who's skiing, then that's fine. But if I'm taking care of all of you and all of you are buried and you're being pulled up, then 6 minutes of CPR. And if they don't have any vital signs, then you move on to the next person. Okay. And then we talked a bit about this. Yeah.
It seems like I've heard of, a number of cases where friends dig their friend out. They appear to be unresponsive. They're not breathing, but are resuscitated or somehow that in that first 15 minutes
Right.
range. Are you seeing that, hearing that? I mean, is that?
Well, yeah, and that's what happened to the two people who were dug up. I don't know exactly the number of minutes that they were buried, but yeah, I mean, the more hypoxic you are, the more your level of consciousness goes down, the more your body's starting to shut down, and so yeah, it might take a while to for someone to gain consciousness again. And also, we're not going to talk about the HOPE score in too much detail, but you can, HOPE is what will help determine survivability if someone is in cardiac arrest or you think that they're in cardiac arrest. Okay. All right, we're done. No, that was the last controversy. We're going to go in reverse order now. Take a second to get a fizzy water. Yep. Okay. All right. So LDL. Okay, so let's talk about equipment and some things that are out there, and I'm curious to hear what you all use in your personal kit, and when you're going out on a rescue, what you carry, and also the ski patrollers out there, what you all use on backcountry routes. All right, and I have some of my thoughts here. I have thought a lot about this and done a lot of research into these into equipment, and the controversy before this talks about how not to get in an avalanche in the first place. But then equipment, we're going to talk about some of the things that might be able to save you in and if you or your partner are in an avalanche. So obviously the minimum equipment that we want to have on our person when we go out into the backcountry, beacon, shovel, probe. And we did a project here, this was 10 years ago now with Will and AJ, to see, we called it, 10 years ago, we called it advanced backcountry equipment. And now, because what this was what do people carry above and beyond the standard beacon, shovel, probe, and where are we going with trends in that? So we surveyed a number of people at the trailheads in Utah and here in the Tetons, and we found, just to kind of cut to the chase, 77% of people who are going into the backcountry who are in avalanche terrain are carrying gear. All right, so that means that 23% are not carrying that standard gear. So a whole nother discussion, and that's for Maddie to take care of. And so at that time, 10 years ago, there were 25% of people were carrying an abalone as well. All right, and 5% of people were carrying an avalanche airbag. So what do y'all think? I mean, we should repeat this study, but what do y'all think? Just for anecdotally, what are people carrying in the backcountry right now? airbags.
A lot more airbags out there, avalanche.
Yeah, airbags, a lot less avalanche. So that's certainly in the Wasatch as well. We're gonna go over a little bit about the research into both of these and then talk about pros and cons, talk about what you all are doing and what you all recommend. All right, so we know that asphyxiation, when we breathe in, when we take a breath in, that's 21% oxygen. When we breathe out, that is about 15% oxygen, and that 15% oxygen, that 6% is replaced by carbon dioxide. So breathing in and out cycles that it cycles that carbon dioxide notching up in our lungs and in our body as well. So just a bit about the Avalon. I think it's a really neat concept, and yeah, it's a neat concept that was developed in kind of in the 90s. So Black Diamond has discontinued it because they're probably making more money on airbags, you know, $1,200 a pop. This we put together with tubing, etc., from the emergency department. We probably like stole $2 worth of equipment to put this together. All right, it's not that hard. This is a valve that when you breathe in, air comes in through here. Then when you breathe out, it puts it away somewhere and it separates that inhaled and exhaled air. All right, so a simple design and a simple concept that I think is neat to look at, even though people are not using it as much these days. So a number of folks down in Salt Lake and University of Utah put this to the test and said, hey, does this actually work in an actual burial? So that's Colin Grissom on the upper right. Some of you know him for avalanche research and high altitude research. He lives down the street from me. So he was one of the first people to do these burial studies and get them published. And it was actually the Journal of the American Medical Association. It was one of the top medical journals in the world. So that's pretty cool that we meaning avalanche researchers got it published in JAMA. So that's all these guys. So they buried people with an Avalon and without an Avalon. And what are your thoughts? Knowing what you know about avalanche physiology, what do you think happened with these real time burials?
Yeah, well, probably better. Yeah.
Probably better with the Avalon. Yeah. So how? Well, so yes, probably. So the IRB, our ethics board, won't allow us to bury people for longer than an hour. So we had to take everyone out of the snow after an hour. But here were the results. All right, so these blue things, these blue dots are the average of all the people that were not wearing the Avalon. All right, so they needed out this is 12 minutes. 12 minutes, 12 minutes. They needed out. And when I say didn't have an Avalon, it's not like they had snow like right over their face. They still had this mouthpiece, but it didn't have the separation function like a normal Avalon does. All right, so they were breathing or exhaling and then rebreathing the same air from that area. And then these people with the Avalon in the configuration that it was that it indicated with the separation of the exhalation lasted for, so this is 60 minutes here. And this is your, I'm just gonna say, this is oxygenation up here. So the oxygenation went down, they needed to be dug out at 15 minutes. Whereas all these other variables went for 60 minutes. So yeah, five times as long, but who knows what would have happened, if we're like, hours and hours and hours. We don't know that. I mean, we can extrapolate, but it just depends on when the exhaled air starts to mix in with the inhaled air. Yeah.
No, but I mean, obviously, if they put that in their mouth and they're able to hold it during the entire ride, they're gonna inhale a lot less, which saves why you get impacted. If they done any, is there any research or any insights to that, of the impact that the Avalon had just in that regard?
You're talking about if someone puts it in, if they get into a slide versus holding it into, yeah, I mean.
Well, just the fact that they're blocking their mouth from being filled with snow.
So there have been a couple cases where an abalone has been ripped out of someone's mouth when they were in the tumble. But I think that those are all anecdotal, just to see what, what has happened after these, after these accidents, and a couple of them have been ripped out. And some people have survived a lot longer with them in. So, all right, so Avalon, pros and cons. So does anyone here still use an Avalon? Yeah, okay, I have a couple backpacks, I you don't usually use them, but yeah, what's your practice? What's that?
Just like wearing a beacon, but it's falling out of an avalanche terrain.
Yeah,
Frequent exposure, it's very low weight penalty,
yeah,
really vomiting on those.
yeah, okay,
Especially on a rescue team where hang fires.
Yeah. okay, cool. Yeah, anyone else regularly use a Avalon? Okay. Yeah, Black Diamond has discontinued it, but you can make one. Any other, so those are the pros. That's very light. It's very easy to use. The concept is simple. If you have someone who can dig you out, right? If you're on a SAR team, and it can, like, instead of being asphyxiated in 20 minutes, then you theoretically have an hour, maybe even more, maybe a lot longer than an hour. So, all right.
You have to remember it, which is a con.
Yeah, have to remember.
Yeah, you have to remember to get it out at the right time.
Yeah,
Unless you keep it out all.
yeah, totally. Okay, so pros, cons, use. All right, the other con we kind of talked about. This is another tragic story in the Utah mountains 9 years ago. It was a solo skier who went out the backcountry gates from the Canyon Ski Resort, and he did some great turns up in the mountains, and then came back in, but he was solo. And when he came back into the resort, he triggered an avalanche. This is about a 37-degree slope, triggered an avalanche and was buried. So we didn't find him for 24, I think it was 36 hours, and he had an Avalon in place. So yes, you can breathe long, you can likely survive longer, and but you need someone to dig you out, all right? So that's obviously a con, is if you're skiing solo, this isn't going to help you a whole lot unless someone knows where you are and has the ability to locate you like very quickly. So yeah, we had helicopter teams, we had our long range receiver, where's Steve? We had our long range receiver out, and we couldn't find him for a long time, and then finally the ski patrol doing beacon searches finally found him. So unfortunately, yeah, you need to have a partner who can dig you out for an Avalon.
Did you take him? Did he go to resuscitation?
No. All right, let's talk about airbags. So airbags can be a lot of fun. This is us at a hut in Canada. At the end, we have a tradition that we all pull our airbags at the end of the trip. The people who have the canisters are a little bit reluctant, but then they get a couple beers in them and they're like, oh yeah, no problem. And this is actually my wife's birthday too. You can see how impressed she is at us. So airbags have kind of come on the scene, and we knew it was going to happen. They can prevent you from being buried in the first place. All right. So this was a project that was done by some of the folks in Italy, and Pascal is up in Vancouver. And the first thing that they found is that 21 or 20% of the people in their sample of and the accidents that were analyzed, 20% of people did not deploy their airbag. All right, and this is for a number of reasons. Let's see, a number of reasons. Deployment failure, they just couldn't get to the handle. Device failure, so this was defined as performance issues that resulted in the design or production revisions, or so something in the airbag did not work. All right, so that's that's a bummer, like that's pretty significant. And then maintenance errors, so the canister wasn't attached properly or something like that, okay? And then device destruction, so pulling through trees, it got ripped, something like that. So 20%, like you can't rely on, you know, even though we think of avalanche airbags doing, you know, preventing fatalities, which we do, we'll talk about in a second here, but there's a lot that can go wrong. And if you have an undeployed, non-deployed airbag, then it's not gonna do any good. But in a deployed or inflated airbag, actually does really well. So this is their analysis in that paper. So if you have a non-inflated airbag, then in their sample, 22% of those people died. But if you have an airbag, just the fact that you have an airbag, then that's cut in half, and that fatality rate goes down to 11%. All right, so that's pretty good odds for reduction in mortality for avalanche airbags, and that's why they've kind of come onto the scene really in the last 10 years since our study exactly 10 years ago. All right, so who here uses an avalanche airbag? Okay, and then who will not wear one? So we did a study a few years ago looking at both in the Tetons and in Utah. I mean, yeah, they're heavy. Yeah, they take maintenance, and there's a lot of negatives about them, and you know, not being able to deploy them. Sometimes that's a challenge as well. But for those deployed airbags, then they can really do a lot of benefit. This is one of the big negatives for avalanche airbags: risk compensation. So does anyone know what this? People know what this means? So it's like the idea that well, when anti-lock brakes came onto the scene, I don't know, 30 years ago, 40, whatever, people decided to drive faster because they could stop quicker. All right, so that's risk compensation, is when something in the system becomes safer, then our natural tendency is to bump up the risk in another part of that system. All right, so do you think that using that or carrying that standard equipment, a beacon shovel probe, will have us compensate for risk? Do you think, are we riskier if we have that gear than if we don't? Yeah, no, AJ's sighing. Okay, who thinks yes? When I'm in the backcountry, I will ski something that I wouldn't if I didn't have beacon shovel probe. And I know I kind of twisted that question, but so here's where we're getting at. Did you have something, Mike? Okay. So the risk compensation has been a subject of study for many years, and this Dr. Headland has done research in just general risk compensation, and has said that in order to really have that compensation in your behavior, so bumping up your risk because something else is making something safer, you need to have four things. So the first thing is the visibility of something. All right, so visibility of a helmet. All right, so you know that you're wearing a helmet, you know your partners are wearing a helmet. So that's visible. An airbag is something that's visible. All right, so you know that you're wearing it. Whereas you have beacon, shovel, and probe, you know, we usually just put it in our pack and hopefully forget about it. Like that's the advantage of beacon, shovel, and probe, is that we forget about it. So the visibility of it. So airbags, they're big. All right, we know that we're wearing them. The other thing that is required for risk compensation is if they negatively impact your experience. So, you know, a helmet is kind of clunky, an airbag is heavy and can be cumbersome. All right, so airbags are heavy. and this is like Headland was not talking about avalanches and skiing in general, but is that they allow a reward. Okay, so we know that if we're wearing a device that we've just shown that reduces our mortality, then that allows us to ski some tau. All right, that allows us to ski some steeper, steeper terrain, some good stuff. And the users have some ability to control that device or product. All right, so airbags, you have the ability to turn on, to turn off, and you have the ability to choose which path, which terrain you're going to ski. All right, so airbags, I think fulfill all four of those requirements for risk compensation. Whereas a lot of people were saying, I don't think that my beacon, shovel, and probe are making me risk compensate. It's because of these things. So we can, visibility, that's just all on our chest or in our pack. They don't really negatively affect our experience. Yeah, I guess they still do that, but it's not really an if then, and then user has control over the devices. Hopefully beacon, shovel, and probe are set it and forget it. So
I guess I would argue that an avalanche pack is equally as hidden as a shovel or a probe.
Say once more.
I guess I would argue that a airbag is equally as hidden as a shovel and probe.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and that's the thing is if you use it every day and that's part of your routine and ritual, and if you don't notice it, if it doesn't negatively affect your experience, or if you have a super light one, then that should be a less impactful on risk compensation. So I definitely buy it. Not buy it, but I get your point. There are some people who will wear an airbag when the risk is considerable or high or such, and then not use it when it's low or moderate. So again, you're sort of playing with these ideas of risk compensation. So going back to that, I know, and I will admit that I have skied slopes that I shouldn't have when I was wearing an airbag. All right. Now that I've admitted it, who else has? Okay, so I know that, and yeah, there is that time where your avalanche instructor or someone might say, "Oh, would you ski that slope if you turned your beacon off?" And they're like, "Yeah, I don't know," but that's a little bit different story. We think that we kind of set it and forget it with our beacons. So who here might go purchase an avalanche airbag after tonight's talk? I mean, it's a great technology. It's a great safety mechanism and a great safety device. However, let's see. There are a lot of, Anthony.
One thing that we have talked about on our team, one thing that we struggle with from a search and rescue aspect is that we don't always get to fly where we're going, right? So we're carrying stuff into the field with us.
Yeah.
And the only way that we can carry it is to strap it to the pack or the outside of the pack, which makes the airbag useless for that. And so I think that's where, from a rescue standpoint, sometimes we struggle in terms of, we know, obviously, we're going into avalanche terrain. That's why we're there. But these are some of the things we struggle with.
Because it might not deploy.
Yeah, we may not do it immediately. Or you have you have your handle out and it gets caught on something.
Yeah.
Strapped to the outside.
Yeah, totally. And yeah.
I have a question for kind of like the group as a whole. Does anybody know, does a patient in an avalanche with an airbag inflated travel faster in the avalanche than without it? In turn, would there be more trauma possible with an airbag inflation? I don't.
My guess is that you would travel similar speed in the snow, but the avalanche airbag is going to pull you up. So I would theorize maybe less trauma, because you might not get pushed down and hit deeper structures, but that's a complete guess.
So, so I was chatting about this talk with a friend of mine, Sean Zimmerman Wall, who's a fellow snowboard ski patroller, and he's one of the education directors for American Avalanche Association. And who is anyone here on Targi or one of the ski patrols? Yeah, and do y'all wear avalanche airbags doing routes?
Of course.
That was for him.
Depends on who that.
Depends on who has them. Okay, yeah, and snowboard, at snowboard with, you know, that's the standard gear now is to wear an avalanche airbag when you're on routes. So I was chatting with him. He said he was caught in avalanche a couple years ago with and pulled his airbag, and he was above the bed surface, and the avalanche went below him, and he just zipped down on his back because he was basically on ice. And so he went a lot faster than he would have if he was in the avalanche itself. So I don't know, that's one story from one person from one resort, but.
There was something else anecdotal, I was looking at it, and they said that there was a heli operation they went to where the guides were a little hesitant about deploying the bag in terrain that had a lot of obstacles on it. Like they said, like here, it's only gonna make it worse. If you
Okay.
deploy it back, like somehow they're gonna get dragged and like stuck into something and hung up and then buried because they couldn't slide down. Right, that's
Okay.
just-
Well, that's an interesting thought. So the way that airbags work is granular convection is actually the proper term. Inverse segregation is the not proper term, but everyone uses it. It's like you have actually some of your trail mix right here, right? You shake up a bunch of nuts, and the bigger nuts rise to the surface, smaller nuts go to the bottom. Sorry. Bigger nuts rise to the top, smaller nuts go to the bottom. And so if you don't have time in the slide in order to have that agitation and that separation, then you may not have, then the airbag might not work the way that physics is intending it. So I don't know if that really answers that question,
Bring it up.
but
There is an answer.
yeah, just an anecdote, a friend of mine, that I have worked with rescue on Denali, got, killed in an avalanche outside of Silverton. They're both wearing airbags, and they were going uphill. And the couple of the theories are, and they both were buried very deep. And, part of the thought of why they didn't stay up on the surface is because they were ascending, and then the avalanche kind of was pulled off below them or around them. And so they weren't necessarily in, like, they didn't have that sorting out. They didn't have that turbulence that allowed that granular convection to bring them to the top. So does that make sense? Is that they weren't in the bulk of the avalanche, they were in the tail end of it, and they were buried, but didn't have that turbulence in order to have that granular convection that might have put them on the surface. So that's also a negative, and one reason that avalanche airbags will not work.
In like the rare piece like that where you have someone that is fully buried with an airbag, is there potential for deflation of the airbag to generate like a large air pocket that might prolong like survival time while buried?
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. So
In the next 10 minutes.
yes, we got that. Perfect. This is perfect. Okay, so avalanche airbags, a lot of times they work, a lot of times they don't. We've talked about a couple of the times that it won't. All right, so if you have low consequence terrain, so not a whole lot of trees, you have a nice open bowl that will allow some of the sorting of the airbag, or some of the sorting of the snow and the particles, then those are, the trauma likelihood is lower, then that's the perfect situation for an airbag, and that's when the airbag will have its most most likely, reduction in mortality. High consequence terrain where you have, a lot of potential for trauma. And terrain traps like deep burials, things like that, that's time when those are the times the airbags will likely not have that reduction in mortality. Here's an example, another case, 2016. You can sort of see the tracks coming over here. This was a party of 2. Here's the avalanche advisory for that day. It was considerable and high in the upper elevations. It was actually a guided party of 2. So the guide came over here and then stopped. The guide came down in here, and then the client came over here and triggered the avalanche. It was a terrain trap, and there's the so steep hill terrain trap in the bottom here, and so a lot going on. The person was reportedly buried under 14 feet of snow. He had an inflated airbag, but 14 feet of snow for one person is impossible. It's impossible to dig out. So that's another case that an airbag is likely not going to help, is train traps, big terrain, things like that. Okay, so let's move on to our last topic. And are you able to play, hit the video?
Yep. Is it in the next slide?
Okay, yeah, it's playing. Okay, so this is some free research that we did in Canada. All right. It's amazing what you can do in Canadian heights and people have nothing better to do.
About 50 centimeters.
Okay, so we're burying this jet force, all right? I don't get anything from Black Diamond to tell you this, but after you take the airbag and the flight back to what is that? And then the next one, if you can play that. So then what we did was we sort of sliced out where we had buried that airbag. And there's that airbag in the corner that it is already deflated. And there is a perfect cast around where that airbag was. All right. So that's theoretically what would happen if you took a big deep breath as the snow is stopping, and then you would theoretically have a little bit of space in order to ventilate or in order to move your chest. All right. So then go on to all right. So then we did an experiment, and we buried people with these airbags, and they're not under there right now. But we did this at Utah Olympic Park, and so we built this mound of snow. And then we built a trench like the other studies. And we put people in the position that most avalanche victims are in when they come to a rest, because most of the mass in our body is kind of torso and head. And then when you have that movement, like the head is kind of pulled downwards and the feet are up. And then we put we installed an avalon, and that was that both of the pieces were, so if you can imagine that this was cut off, this was on the top of the helmet in that space that the deflated airbag had just created. All right. So, yeah, thoughts of what happened to these people?
Therapeutic hypothermia.
What's that?
Therapeutic hypothermia.
Therapeutic hypothermia, yeah. And then this is what will happen to this guy in a second or so. Okay, so then it created a space that airbag had just, created. And here were you can, play this. And then, yeah, we have 4 minutes. So yeah, our goal was to bury them within 30 seconds. And then after 3 minutes, that's when the airbag deflates. And we're monitoring them this whole time.
There'll be a sign up sheet for research volunteers at the back of the room.
I got a raffle.
Okay, so then, again, we are only allowed to bury people for an hour. And here are the results. We compared our deflated airbag people to an avalanche, all right? Because that was kind of a good control, because that's what it was doing. But we put, so they were breathing and rebreathing the snow in that area that the airbag once was. And pretty much, I'm just gonna summarize this. Everyone, all 12 of our subjects went the whole hour, except one of them needed to be dug up after 55 minutes, all right? So that's pretty good. So if you think about that guy who was buried under 14 feet of snow, if he had this airbag versus another airbag that stays inflated, then there's a possibility that, you could last for an hour to have someone or a team dig you out. So, again, I'm not saying these are one of the heavier ones. There's a lot lighter ones, but if you're going to be wearing something every day, this is another added benefit for those 20% of cases that people are buried with airbags. So it's a lot of things to think about. We'll finish off talking about the safe back. Who here has seen the safe back? Yeah, okay. Safe back is a product from Norway that basically these things here are fans. So the idea is not to displace exhaled air, it's just to disrupt it. And in the snowpack is to get some of that air that's in the snowpack elsewhere and to displace that carbon dioxide that you are breathing out. So, and I've talked to them a bunch and they've wanted us to do burial studies looking at this. And I was like, why would you use this instead of an avalanche airbag or an avalanche? And they're like, well, first of all, this is not for someone who will use an airbag in the first place, because this is lighter and also probably less expensive. And they say, well, you could pull this at the top of the run, and instead of needing to keep this in your mouth, it's going to be blowing the whole time, whether you're on the surface or get buried in an avalanche. So those are their pros. I see a lot of cons. I mean, a con is that you can still you're still going to get buried in this. And I'd rather be on the surface than be buried in any circumstance. But another device that you may see, I don't know, 10 years, maybe a lot of people are going to be using it. So, all right, I think we're going to wrap up here. And yeah, any further questions before Maddie gets us on to our next
On to dinner time.
dinner time. Well, cool. That was a great discussion on a lot of different topics. And again, there's a whole section that we didn't even get to that maybe will come out later on in the spring or next year. I'd see you there. See you then.
Remember to get that relative today, let Maddie know what you want to know about, what we do differently or better next time, but thanks for coming out.